Keep the fires burning with Quilting Arts Season 2700 as we kindle your artistic spirit. I'm Vivica Hanson-Denegri, and with me is co-host Susan Brubaker-Knapp. We invited a talented lineup of art quilters to fire up your imagination. Today's show features paint techniques. We'll start with Sarah Ann Smith, working with thin paints. Compare painting on different kinds of cloth and with various extenders and flat washes. Then meet Sharon Wall for fabric painting outside the lines, creating watercolor effect on leaves, then adding more detail with free motion veins. Fan the flames of creativity with paint today on Quilting Arts. Today is all about using paint to fire up your art quilter, and joining me is Sarah Ann Smith. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. I am so glad to be back, and I have fallen in love with using paint on my quilts.
And you use different consistencies. Today we're talking about thin paint, right?
I do. Today is thin. Think of it as watercolor, and a lot of the techniques I'm talking about you can also use with thin dye. So Great. This does multiple duties. One of the first and most important things is to test what you're working on. I use both cloth and interfacing. So I've done a test brush out, wet paint on dry cloth, wet on wet cloth, and this is the same cotton but with an extender. It's almost like putting a gesso on a canvas, right. And you can see how different the results are. And then I did the same thing with interfacing because, for example, in the lupins behind me, the lupin petals are all interfacing.
Gives a different
since
effect.
They don't fray.
Right.
Exactly. The easiest thing that you can do with the thin paint is modify fabric that you already have. Drives me crazy going to look for stuff all over the place when I can take what I've got and modify it. So this bold batik is toned down with green, and the same thing with these two, and you can see the changes that happen. You would never know that this was not originally green or blue.
So this is transparent paint on top of the fabric?
These are all transparent, ink-like thin paints on fabric, and I use these in the bottom of the rose hip. If I'd used them as they were to begin with, it would have caught your eye and ruined it. Right. So these are different ways to do something quick and easy.
Got it.
You can also paint interfacing, and that's what I did here with these petals, and I love having the difference between the heavier and the thin because it's almost like the backlit, the sun behind the flowers.
Right, the substrate makes a difference.
And you can turn it over if it doesn't soak through all the way. You can use the back side as well, so I don't put my fusible on until after the fact.
And you get a different value that way,
and to get a different value. This quilt is part of the Inspired by the National Capital Region exhibit, and I had a hand-dyed fabric that I didn't like the looks of too much, and this is actually part of what was cut off the edges, and so it looked dingy, so I took a blue wash, then pink, and then yellow, and modified it. I also used thin paints on the sheer fabric and here on the soldiers at the Iwo Jima Monument. I use aloe vera to thicken it, and I have taken ink-like paints and ink consistencies, and in the pink mushroom quilt, that was a pink whole cloth when it started, and all of the brown and darker pinks that you see were thickened ink-like paints, and that's how I created that one.
So that's really effective because you get the effect of ink, but it's thick enough so it stays and it gives you a little more depth.
Exactly, and so I could have done that with a heavier bodied paint, but this is what I happen to have, and I like the technique, so I used it. So you don't have to have all kinds of every paint. I took plain...
Should I move this over?
Sheer fabric in a second. This fabric was painted and became this guy. So you can change it and do it as easily as that. And now that one can move aside.
Okay.
This is really fun. Is how to create a watercolor wash. And this is the cloth painting on it just dry. And you can see that it's very...
Brush marks almost, right?
Almost brush marks, and it's stripy.
I like that, though. You might want that effect.
You might want that effect. For sunset, I wanted it more blendy. And this one is using a fabric that I have pre-treated. This is pre-treated with a fabric extender, and then I brush it on.
PFD?
PFD, exactly. Prepared for dyeing fabric. If you just have regular white, throw it through the wash and get any of the finishes off the fabric.
So you sort of scrub all that stuff out of it.
This is the exact same thing, but not pre-treated. And up here at the top, I can lay this over here and can compare the two. And you can see that there's like little scallops and marks here. And you might or might not want those. I don't see those when I see a clear sky sunset. So using the extender, which is something that thins the paint, it's basically the base product that the pigment goes into.
Right.
And so it adheres to the fabric in the same way, and it makes a big difference in how the paint acts on the cloth.